He's married to an actress who's estranged from her family, who lives in a fantasy land. So is there any surprise that he adopts that set of thinking? Welcome to One to One with Simon Jordan. We're back with a new year. Don't forget to, of course, keep liking and subscribing. Keep leaving those brilliant questions in the comment section below. But let's get on with 2023. I think it's unedifying and unpalatable that people feel the necessity to wash their dirty linen in public. I also think that the sole focus is money. So I don't know why people are getting the knickers in a twist and stop looking at his motivations and what he's trying to achieve. He's getting paid. He's married to an actress who's estranged from her family, who lives in a fantasy land. So is there any surprise that he adopts that set of thinking? I think it is a shame. I think it brings the monarchy into disrepute. I think it's racked with hypocrisy. I think it's racked with double standards and disingenuity. And the more he speaks, the more you find the contradictions in the things that he says. And we can pick up on such things as his ability to be able to go and see his therapist when he had a conflict with his brother, but no one seemed to be able to give any support to his wife when she was supposedly having suicidal thoughts. We can talk about his observations where he lit the blue touch paper. He didn't, and neither did she say that people were racist. He just lit the blue touch paper, pretty much made it evident what the thought process was and let the media carry the mantra. But clearly that was their indication. So I think it's all very sad, unnecessary, unpalatable, and what's become of our royal family. And those that think that, you know, his mother would be turning in her grave, well, she danced with the media, irrespective of the tragedy that came to the end. I think it's a very tragic set of circumstances. I think it's unnecessary, but I think it's all about money and it should be just qualified that way. I think it's pure old tittle-tattle, quite frankly. If you listen to what's being said, what was done to me, how awful it all was, and what awful life I have, and how small my room was in comparison to my brother's. It is silly, and I do think it's a silly indication of where we got to, and the hypocrisy of the sections of the media that are going feigned outrage. Piers Morgan, feigned outrage, up in arms about it, whilst covering every single syllable of it. So we have to look inward and outward and say, what a sad state of affairs. What a situation that perhaps you'll regret in the longer run, because you don't do these things without consequence. And other people will have another view about how hard done by he was and how awful it is and how right it is to speak his truth. But there were two versions of the truth. And in this situation, I think quite pleasingly, we're only going to get his side, because quite frankly, if the institution is the royal family were to respond, it would get more column inches, more media time, and it would go on and on and on. So all in all, disappointing, unnecessary, but all about money. And there it will dovetail into football. What have I made of Todd Boehly's spending? He is a new owner of a football club, like we all have been as owners, and you're going to lead with your chin and you're going to make mistakes. It's his money. It's the investors' money. It's not Chelsea's money, because Chelsea won't generate enough revenue to be able to make these transfer acquisitions that they're making. Yeah, Cucurella is overpaid for. We've all overpaid for players. Everybody overpaid for players. Roman Abramovich from the get-go overpaid for players. Man City overpaid for players in the past. What would you rather have an owner do? Not spend any money and be criticised for not investing, or overspending and costing himself some money and then learning lessons in the longer game? This isn't a sprint for Todd Boehly, this is a marathon. And whilst in the short term it looks like they're making mistakes and people are having it away and taking their pants down metaphorically, but I also think that, you know, Boehly is in the business of getting a return on a £2.5 billion investment. All those that sat there going, oh, we must get a new sort of ownership. Oh, it's wonderful that Chelsea have been bought for £2.5 billion. Look at this and look at that. Well, and look at the Glazers now, awful they are for leveraging a purchase. This is a leveraged purchase of different guys. You've got £2.5 billion worth of cash investment in this business that they're going to want to see a return on. So that's going to come at some price. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as, okay, here he is, a new owner, a new breed. There'll be some consequences to it, because there's another American ownership model that might create some disharmony amongst the British pyramid of football and how it's been held together, because they might not like relegation, they might not like this. But all in all, I think, what's the issue here? He's spending money. On one hand, you've got people like Gary Neville suggesting that he's too busy at the beginning of the season. On the other hand, they'll make an argument that says that people don't get involved enough to be able to make these decisions. You can't do right for doing wrong. So I think it's a work in progress. I think we'll see what Chelsea are and what they're not in April, May. honestly, I will remember Gareth Bale with a deep set of disinterest. I think he's a very talented player. I remember watching him, I think he made his debut against my Palace, and we were told about this young kid that everyone was raving about. Came on, hit a 30-yard free kick, almost took our goalkeeper into the back of the net with him, and thought, my word, look at this. And obviously he landed at Tottenham. He didn't get a gig because Harry Redknapp didn't recognise his talent, and eventually he landed, because the myth was that, not much the myth, but the ideal behind Gareth Bale was that every time he played for Tottenham initially, he never won. So he didn't play many times. But of course he went on to be an exceptional player. I'm disappointed that the legacy that he'll leave to some extent will be people saying, well, that's a half empty glass rather than a half full one, because his achievements at Real Madrid were quite significant. I don't know why he didn't gel with them. You know, people dispute my observations that I've made in the past about his inability to involve himself and immerse himself in the culture. His mate Hal Robson-Kanu pushes back on that and says he speaks fluent Spanish and just wasn't taken to because people are looking to be unpleasant to him. I'm not sure that's right. I think ultimately, if you look at his achievements and you take away the personality and the backdrop of people's motivations to discredit him and some of the silly things that he's done about Wales first, golf second, Real Madrid third, and look at the body of work and say, well, for Wales he was phenomenal, ultimate match winner at times, carried them into tournaments and through tournaments purely on his shoulders. For Real Madrid, winning them Champions Leagues. For Tottenham, getting them one of their biggest transfer fees and the world record transfer fee at the time. At 33, retiring, I think there were years left in him, but the way he was built differently to Ronaldo and Messi, so there was always perhaps going to be this stress on him physically. I think we saw 80% of Gareth Bale, and that will always be something that you look back on. But if you want to look at it from the proper perspective of a half full glass, it's a remarkable career. And I'm sure Jonathan Bennett thinks that every time he goes to the bank and look at his bank balance after being his agent. Nasser Al-Khelaifi didn't specifically talk to me about investing in a Premier League football club. He talked to me about Paris Saint-Germain and the fact that he turned down a €4 billion offer, and that maybe he was prepared to release a minority share in PSG. I think it's inevitable that the Qatari situation is in play now. I think you'll find that loads of sports will be looking at going over to Qatar and starting to do things over there, boxing and UFC and God knows what else. You'll start to see pop up with events over there because the opportunity has been seen that they can host events. The Middle East is where the money is. You know, I'm sure the Qataris were in a discussion about Fury versus Usyk. It's an interesting one because I don't see Nasser, I spoke to him yesterday actually, I don't see Nasser or QSI, which is the Qatari Sports Investments, wanting to have a minority stake. They're not minority stake players. So it would seem to me that this might well be Joe Lewis's swan song, and that maybe you'll see, if there is truth in this allegation that they're talking to Tottenham, that you might well find a situation where it becomes far more significant than a minority stake. But what I can say is, despite my reservations about the way that PSG is run, I have far more regard and respect for Nasser Al-Khelaifi, having spent a lot of time with him and understand his motivations. I still have worries about Middle Eastern money being used for other things than just simply sports. But as an operator, he's a very impressive man, so you know, it would change the tide at Tottenham, so Tottenham fans would be happy. It would still cause me a degree of concern and a bit of reservation about how the governance. At the end of the day, one of the things that Nasser said to me in Qatar, when I said to him about this spend pattern and breaking financial fair play, he said, quite frankly, quite rightly too, if football wants to change that, get some stronger governance. And he's right. So if people like me want to flap our gums about how it shouldn't be and how it should be, and if football really wants to change it and control the way that it financially operates for outliers like the PIF fund with Newcastle, and like Sheikh Mansour at Man City, and like QSI at PSG, then football needs to step up, get some teeth and regulate properly and make sure that the industry is governed properly. But all being told, it'll be an interesting one. I'll see how it plays out. I wouldn't be surprised either which way if Khelaifi and QSI invest in Tottenham, or if something more significant happens with Tottenham. I have been, with the FA Cup and the League Cup, I'm a major advocate for these tournaments. I'm tired of this narrative that the rest of Europe is dropping its third cup, so the League Cup should go. Well, the League Cup is part of the Football League, so it needs that revenue, so no, it shouldn't go. I'm tired of the narrative that, that we start to diminish inherent assets and valuable traditions inside this country and sell them off to either foreign investment or diminish them. The FA Cup is without a doubt still the biggest cup tournament in domestic football. It supersedes any of these other cups. Yes, you can remember, maybe if we think hard, we can think of the Copa del Rey. I would, because I lived in Spain, but go tell me some of the other cup tournaments in other countries around Europe and around the world and see if they slip off the tongue as easily as the FA Cup does. It has inherent value. Could it be commercialised better? Of course it could. Go to the question, replays. Look, maybe there is an argument to suggest that replays and the thought process behind concluding ties on the day might have to be re-evaluated, because you're coming against an irresistible force of arguments from the Premier League about scheduling and the player situation and the amount of games that players are paying. And all that will come at a price somewhere along the line unless you address it and arrest it. But of course, when you start addressing things, you start a slippery slope. You start saying, well, I'll tell you what, we'll get rid of FA Cup replays. Of course, back in the day, FA Cup replays for lower league clubs were wonderful opportunities to generate revenue. Imagine playing at Yeovil and getting 5,000 fans, if that was the capacity, getting a draw against a Premier League side and heading to their place and getting 50% or 45% of the revenues of a 50,000-seater stadium. So you've got to price everything in. If we can get better distribution in football, so that there's a fairer distribution outside of the Premier League to the pyramid, then maybe such things as FA Cup replays become less financially beneficial. The tradition of an FA Cup replay, well, I like it. I've always liked it. The third round draw was always one of the biggest days on the calendar. For me as an owner, whether we were in the Premier League or the Championship, it was always an interesting aspect. But I think we are into the territory, if it weren't a slippery slope, if it wasn't the start of the thin end of a wedge where ultimately it's basically the FA Cup being completely diminished, I would be in favour of saying, let's kill it or cure it on the day. Let's suggest that replays don't get made in order to alleviate fixture scheduling, and we play the FA Cup as a knockout tournament that concludes on the day. So if you're in a draw situation, you play the extra 30 minutes and you play a penalty shootout. Of course, then what you'll hear is Premier League clubs whining, if they were dragged into extra time, that their players have been put through an extra 30 minutes, forgetting the fact they have another replay. You can't win, you can't square that circle to a perfect outcome. But I would be more inclined to suggest that we stay as we are, or worst case scenario, cap it at only ever being allowed for an FA Cup to be diminished in such a way that the replays are eliminated and a conclusion is played out on the day. Right, that's it for the first edition of 2023 of One to One with Simon Jordan. Let me know your views on Todd Boehly, Gareth Bale's retirement and his career, and of course, the never-ending thorny subject of Prince Harry. Keep liking and subscribing, keep leaving those questions in the comment section below, and I shall look forward to seeing you next week.